Welcome everyone to another episode of Kindling the Hearthfire. We are a little late this time around, but I want to wish everyone a happy Midsummer. I'm adding that in the notes. I hope everyone had a wonderful time, however they celebrated this time of year. Our Protogrove had a wonderful time here in the South Bay. We had a lovely ritual with a scrumptious potluck afterwards. We have a wonderful episode for you this time around, and all websites and sources will be listed in the links in the show notes as per usual. Now, on to the rest of the podcast. Our Protogrove just got done with its Lughnasadh ritual, so this is coming out a little late, but I didn't want to skip around a lot and get lost like I have in the past, so we are going to be doing a Midsummer episode for you here today. We made an effort again to focus on sovereignty during this time of year, and once again, we worked with the goddess Anya. In the Patreon subscribers section of the podcast, I went a little deeper into connecting with Anya with sovereignty, but today I want to talk about what Midsummer meant to the Irish in particular. The sun is as... Can't talk today. The sun is at its height in the sky, and in Ireland, the land is blooming. It is not yet time to harvest, but the signs are there that it would be soon. The Fae, or the good folk, are out in force, and the cattle are grazing in the summer fields. I would think at this time of year, it would be very full of tension, full of possibilities for the later part of the year, including the harvest. The seed has been planted months ago, and the growth has been watched over with anticipation and no small amount of fear in the months leading up to this time. It was like the last push in a race. The finish line is in sight, but still a ways off before the race is won. This is a very powerful time, full of magic, and many traditions sprung up in response, mostly surrounding protection and hope for the rest of the coming year. June and July in Ireland were considered to be two of the leanest months of the year, historically speaking. The stores were nearly depleted by this time, even in the most frugal of households, and it only added to the tension and anticipation for a good harvest coming in August. The whole economy of the Irish countryside grew unbalanced in the century around the 1750s to the 1840s. A great increase in the volume of tillage, especially of corn for export, which would be barley in this case, because they use corn for many, many different grains, including barley. There was an increase in tillage, especially of corn for export, which brought a corresponding increase in the numbers of agricultural laborers who had no land of their own except for potato plots that were let to them for labor rent. This came to a head in what history calls the Great Potato Famine and the Exodus of Ireland. I won't go into it here, but let's just say that June and July had a history of being horrible months in ancient Ireland, and many went hungry. To this effect, this time of year, people gathered together what they could to make sure the poorest among them made it through till the harvest came in. And that's generally what this time is about, taking care of the others around you and making sure everybody gets through with more than just minimal, and just were somewhat comfortable until good times came in again. All right. Now, on to what Dave the Bard calls the talky bit of the podcast. This time we have the pleasure of having Gwian Raven from the most recent Eight Winds Festival, and he is talking about the magic of food. Enjoy.
So enough about fear. And now we're going to talk about food. One of my favorite Fs. So, and this is a bit of a long story. So I'm going to introduce myself. For those of you who I've not met before, my name is Gwion. It's a Welsh name. I'm originally from England, and Kirk and I have known each other for a few years now. We met, I don't know, 6-7 years ago, something like that, yeah. And I'm really excited to be here and to chat about food. But as I mentioned, it's a long story. So, we're going back 1.8 million years. And it's going to take me the rest of the weekend. No. But that's where we're going to start. So, interestingly enough, I didn't know what the space was going to look like before I got here. And conveniently enough, we're sitting around a fire. 1.8 million years ago, in a cave in South Africa, it's called the Wonderwork Cave, are the earliest remains of human activity in a central and repetitive place. 1.8 million years ago. So maybe you know your parents or your grandparents or the country perhaps that your folks immigrated from so many years ago, or maybe you've been part of this continent for 10,000 years, who knows. But what we are doing right now, coming together in a small band around a fire, our great, many times great ancestors were doing in South Africa 1.8 million years ago. Let that sink in. As you said, we have cell phones and the internet and all of these amazing technological changes, and we are repeating an act that has happened how many times in 1.8 million years? So what they discovered in this cave was stones and the remnants of fires. And the cave sat over this plain. So what do you think some of the reasons are that a small group, let's say it was us, 1.8 million years ago, why would we go into a cave with a fire in the middle? What do you think? Shelter. Safety. Warmth. Absolutely, warmth, right? And what do you think we might have done? What do you think our great ancestors did, just like we're doing now, around a fire? What do you think they did?
Telling stories.
Telling stories. What else?
Cooking.
Yeah, cooking.
Eating.
Eating.
Just communing with each other.
Dancing.
Communing with each other, dancing.
Your other favorite F.
My other favorite F.
Ancestors.
Otherwise, we wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
If they hadn't have F'd the hell out of that fire, we would no. And that's when the workshop went off the rails.
And we were glad the children were at the creek.
That's right. Exactly. Just remember, you brought it up, not me. So, I kept the workshop clean.
Say the word.
That's right. So they came together for shelter. Who knows what was going on out on those plains? I'm sure there were predators of some kind that were out there. Warmth, safety from the elements, and a place to come and tell stories, and to eat, and to commune, and to be with each other, to be warm and safe. There's no handbook that says, by the way, 1.8 million years ago, this is what we talked about. But I can imagine that if they came together to eat, if they did it more than once, I bet you there was a ritual. Guaranteed. And maybe it was who got to eat first. Maybe it was who got to tell the story first. Maybe it was who stoked and tended the fire. Who stood outside. There's a phrase that says if you do something once, it's innovation. If you do it twice, it's tradition. Imagine if folks came together and they went, Kirk, could you stand outside while we're, making the chicken, please? And you go, yeah, great, all right. And you go outside, and then all of a sudden, Kirk's family for the next 100 years are the cave watchers, and they stand outside. That's how traditions get born. Right?
Lions come to dinner.
That's right.
Cave bears, I think.
Cave bears, man-bear pigs, all the scary things. So,
Smilodon.
if we fast forward to about 800,000 years ago, so big jump in time, in Israel, in what is now Israel, in Jordan, in Kenya, there are more caves. And in these caves, they found something else. They found a rudimentary hearth. So not just a fire, but a structure where they believe things were cooked. And there were remnants of oysters, shells, bones, things like that have been found. If we go to about 65,000 years ago in Australia, there's a clan of folk there called the Mirrah people. And the Mirrah people also lived in caves. By the way, if you ever do time travel, as you do, I recommend going into real estate because apparently caves were a big deal. Lots of people lived in caves. So, cave for rent, just 1,000 things. But in this cave, in the Mirrah people, they were some of the first people to put their handprints into the walls to trace and to paint, right, with ochre and similar pigments. And around those fires, they've also found cooking implements. So they found a sharpened stick. They found what they imagined to be something that would go over, like a grate that would go over a fire, fashioned out of bits of wood, flat pieces of stone that they think were used for grinding. And on this very land, as recently as 1,000 years ago on this land, the Ohlone and the coastal Miwok and the Pomo folks that lived on these lands, you can go just up the road to Olompali State Park, and there's a huge boulder, and it's got what looks like cup marks all over it, and it's where people would gather and they would grind acorns, and they would make acorn mush. That was, in the scheme of things, yesterday, right?
Right.
So folks have always gathered. Since human beings were together, we've gathered. Now we can only guess at what they did. We can only imagine. Anthropologists cannot unlock the key. They can say, well, they ate food here, but we don't know who ate food, why they ate that food, who made the food, caught the food, whatever it was. Until, big jump in time, about 9,000 years ago. And now we move into the Fertile Crescent, to between the Euphrates and the Tigris, in today what is modern Iran and Iraq, which was then the beginnings of the Sumerian culture. And Sumer, the folks in Sumer, did something amazing. They made clay tablets. And on those, I promise this is about food. We'll get to the food, all right? They made clay tablets. And on those clay tablets, they etched or stamped things. And what they wrote, they concentrated on three things, which is, as pagans in all the various flavors of pagans that we are, three really amazing things that we should be excited and thankful about. They wrote about commerce. Kirk owes me 3 goats. They wrote about you do owe me 3 goats. For making me do that. Actually, you didn't make me. I guess I volunteered. I owe you 3 goats.
That's it.
So they wrote about commerce. They wrote about the cosmology of their gods. The very first poet, by the way, written poet, was a woman, a priestess of Inanna. Her name was Oenduana. And she's the first. Think about this. We venerate Shakespeare, or the Shakespeares, as we should. And we venerate all the great poets and writers. The very first recorded poet that we've got is a woman poet who tells the story of her devotion to Inanna. Oh, fantastic. And that's like 7,000 years ago, right? She writes this. Incredible. But they wrote the cosmologies of their gods. They wrote who owed who to what to whom. And they wrote recipes.
Wow.
In Yale University, there are 35 tablets called, very not creatively, the Yale tablets. Could have come up with a better name than that, but there's these tablets that are cuneiform tablets. And they've got various things written on them, but on these tablets there are recipes.
Wow.
Beer.
That's one of them. I'll come back to beer in a minute.
It saved the world.
Yeah. But there's a recipe for something called tuhu broth. And it's essentially a lamb stew cooked over one of those in a pot, in a ceramic pot, suspended. Any of this sounding familiar if anyone's a witch? You know, like a tripod thing with, you know, there was water in it. There was cubes of meat, lamb. There was arugula. There was garlic. There were leeks. There were onions. There were spices like cumin. It's the only problem with this workshop, but I promise I'll give you a date in a little bit.
Coming.
Right. Cumin, coriander, salt. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is.
I made it.
I was about to say, you wrote it in your book.
It is in my book.
You have a book?
I'll tell you about that later.
Okay.
Yes, I do. And the first recipe in the book is tuhu broth.
Nice.
It's one of 42 recipes. It's incredible. When I was eating this, I was thinking, if I was a devotee of Inanna, or if I was holding a ritual dinner for Inanna, or if this weekend was about Inanna, we could make tuhu broth.
Mm-hmm.
The priests and priestesses, the temple folk, the goddess herself would recognize the taste of tuhu broth. Is that incredible? Think about that for a moment.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Right? So, now to beer. First of all, the first brewers of beer, well, maybe not the first, but when it became an occupation, most brewers were women. There was a goddess called Ninkasi.
Yep.
Interestingly enough, in the late 1990s, a fellow by the name of Fritz, who was the owner of Ankerstein Brewery, heard about something called the Praise Hymn to Ninkasi. But it's really long, and if you know how to read it properly, it's a mnemonic device for brewing beer. So they did. You can buy Ninkasi beer today.
It's in Portland, or outside of Portland.
Yeah, you can find it in a couple different
And they
breweries
have
have
a
done it.
gorgeous artistic representation of Nikasu in stained glass.
Oh, brilliant.
And then they made drink glasses.
Yeah,
They're either in Eugene or Denver.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
So interestingly enough, beer, as overseen by this amazing goddess, became the providence of women. So all the master or mistress brewers of the time were all women brewers. And they would flavor it. They didn't have hops. Hops wouldn't be around for many millennia, actually. So they used things like dates. They used pomegranate molasses or something very close to that. They used honey. These were the fermenting agents along with the yeasts and whatnot. And they didn't have wheat at that particular point, so they used barley, which is, similar. It's in the same family, right?
I have a question. Since they used honey, what is the difference between that and mead? Or is that similar?
It's similar. The difference is the wheat or the barley that was in it. That's the biggest difference, right? So they made this sticky, thick, sweet, very alcoholic mash. It was about 3.5%, which is, a fairly decent beer. I mean, it's not...
Wouldn't be allowed in Utah.
wouldn't be allowed in Utah. I'm not allowed in Utah. 2 of my favorite Fs happened in Utah and they won't let me back. Never mind. Different story.
One of those a felony?
Hey, 3 Fs, I'm sorry. Yeah. No. So anyway, it was thick. Interesting side note. There's a relief, like a cuneiform relief, a picture of people drinking. Who's been to Las Vegas? Or maybe New Orleans? Who's had a hurricane drink? Right, it's one of those big giant glasses, and you and I we each have a straw.
Yeah.
Not a new idea.
Maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Not a new idea. On this relief that's 6,000 years old, there's a couple of ancient Sumerians with 2 great big straws, both drinking out of a giant glass.
Wow.
Well, vessel. Because it was so thick, all the mash would float to the top and all the booze would be down the bottom. So they invented straws out of clay. So next time you've got a little bendy straw and you think, we're brilliant, look at this technological wonder. It's been around for 7,000 years. Ancient Sumerians made drinking straws so you could get drunk together. I mean, so you could enjoy the fruits of... It's pretty good. So, civilization. Big jump again. So, there's, if anyone knows some of the stories of Inanna, there's this great story called Inanna and Enki, the god of wisdom. Here's the short version of it. Slightly updated from the prose of the time. Inanna is a young queen, and she's coming into her fullness, and she thinks to herself, I'm going to go and chat with my uncle Enki, who happens to be a god. So she gets on her barge, and off she goes, leaves from the city of Ur, which is still around today, roughly, and she pops off to go and see her uncle Enki. And Uncle Enki says to his attendants, oh, look, my niece Inanna is going to be showing up. Let's do some things. Let's make sure the house is clean. Let's lay on a few nibbles, and let's get some beer. Nice way to welcome somebody, right? Druids are all about hospitality. This seems like a good, right? It's good. So Inanna comes in and she says, hello, Uncle Enki. I'd like to be a goddess, please. And he says, right, let's have some beer and we'll chat. Again, slightly updated version of the story. So they're sitting around and he says, well, Inanna, would you like some beer? And Inanna says, sure thing, Uncle Enki, I'd love some beer. And they quaff a beer or two. And he says, you know, if you want to be a goddess, you should help the peoples with civilization. And we have some tools for those. And we call them the May. And she says, go on. And he says, well, let's have another beer. And she says, great idea, Uncle Enki. And they have another beer. And he says, so the May are things like sheep herding and counting and the adoration of the phallus.
Who doesn't?
Who doesn't, right? Well, I mean, maybe someone doesn't, and that's great for you. However, these were some of the things. And so, Inanna says, well, could I have these tools? And Uncle Enki, who's had a few pints at this point, says, yeah, all right. Sure, you can have those. And she says, are there other May? And he goes, well, as a matter of fact, yes, there are. And he goes on to list all of the May, all of the tools for making civilization. One of which was, just to be fair, the ploughing of the vulva. So, as we mentioned, the adoration of the phallus. So anyway, she keeps drinking, and he keeps drinking, but little does old Enki know that Inanna can really hold her booze. And she drinks Uncle Enki under the table, and he passes out. And she says to her attendant, quick, grab all the May. We're going to leave, quick. And they load it all onto the barge. And Uncle Enki wakes up the next morning and he looks around the palace and goes, where's all my stuff? And one of his attendants says, I think I saw Inanna leaving with a full barge. And he says, quick, get after her. And he sends some monsters, as gods do, out after Inanna. But unfortunately, Inanna had pulled into the port, had all the peoples unload all the tools, and said, let's have a great big feast. And I'll teach you about civilization. By the way, I could use a nice pint. And so they did. And there was a big celebration. And for 500 years or more, there was a big celebration where the people would get together. They would bring in all the foods and all the beers and have smoked antelope and other things that were available at the time. And they ate. And they praised in honor. And that's how civilization began, in case anyone ever asks you. It was a drinking game that went terribly wrong for the gods. Then we moved to Greece. So, cave in South Africa, people sitting around going, you want some mastodon? I'll eat the mastodon. I could have another piece. I could eat. To civilization, to beer. Right, medium rare mastodon, if you don't mind. And then, now we come to Greece. I'm sure everyone's heard of Athena. Okay. Do you know what gift Athena gave to the people? Olive tree, right, and olive oil. Great story. Fabulous story. So there's this unnamed city, and the king of this unnamed city said, well, I can't be king of, I don't know, anywhere. I need a name for this place. And Poseidon and Athena were chatting, and Poseidon said, well, I'd like to have a town named after me, and Athena said, me too. Poseidon said, fine, we'll have a bet, as the gods do. You might see a theme here between the overly confident male god and the very smart woman god here. So, Poseidon comes down and says to the king, so me and old Athena here, we're going to give you a gift, and all the peoples here, you're going to vote. And whichever gift you think is the most, you'll name the city after us and you'll worship us. And the king said, sounds like a good idea. Poseidon, you brought it up. Go for it. That's not classic Greek text. It's my version of it, in case you were wondering. So, Poseidon says, great, here's a well. And it's a salt water well. And the people said, well, nice, good, what else you got? And he said, well, here's the thing with this well. If you make me your patron of the city here, this well will give you good trade, seafaring trade, military prowess with your navy. It'll be good. And they all thought, yeah, that's not bad. All right, Athena, what do you have? And Athena says, I have an olive tree. And they went, oh, it's a bush. We've got a lot of them. And she said, no, this is a special one. If you plant this one, what will happen is you'll get shade and you'll get these lovely little olives, and if you squeeze them you'll get out this amazing oil, and you can use it for everything. You can eat it, you can light it, use it for fuel, and you can also trade it. And they went, well, that sounds pretty good. It's also rather delicious. Great, we'll take that, please. And so they named the town Athens. And if you go to the Acropolis, around the base of the Acropolis, you will find olive trees. And some of those very olive trees, they say, are the ones that Athena planted. Not bad, eh? Yeah. All right. Moving forward to Rome. I promise I'm going to get to the modern day. We're going to go to Rome. Rome's an interesting place. Has anybody studied Rome? A little bit. Okay, you probably know more than I do. Couple of great things about Rome. Has anybody heard of Gordon Ramsay?
We've heard Gordon Ramsay.
You've heard? Okay. So
he likes one of the Fs.
Right, he does like one of the Fs. Lots of the Fs. Even had a show called The F Word. So very good. So, Gordon Ramsay's kind of a rock-style chef. You could throw in maybe an Anthony Bourdain, right? Somebody like that, kind of a bad boy chef. Again, not a new idea. There was a bloke in Rome by the name of Apicius, and he was the first rock-style chef. And so popular was Apicius that many people years later started taking on his name. So it would be like if Kirk changed his name to, Kirk Bourdain or Kirk Ramsay, right? So there were lots of cooks and chefs that thought, well, I rather like that bloke and the way he cooks. I'm going to change my name to his name as an honor, right? But Apicius wrote books, but they sort of disappeared. And then about 400 years after he died, they were rewritten by somebody else. But there's this amazing book of Apicius' recipes. Now, Apicius was rich, like ridiculously rich as a Roman. And he got a bee in his bonnet one day. He'd heard about Libyan shrimp on the Roman internet, read it in the weekly Pax Romana, I don't know, but so he jumps on a ship, as you do, goes to Libya, says, "I'd like a bushel of Libyan shrimp, please," and they said, "Oh, sorry mate, we're all out," and he went, "Well, damn it," and got back on his boat and came home again. I don't know about you, but it costs a bit to fly to Libya today. Only to get there, he never even got off the boat. He said, "Can I have some shrimp, please?" And they were out. It was the wrong time of the year, and so he came home empty-handed. But there is a recipe for Libyan shrimp, which I made. It's really good. It's got lots of really neat spices in it, right? Funnily enough, a little cumin, a little coriander, some cilantro, or that version of it. You can put something else in if you like parsley or something. But all these great recipes. Unfortunately, the Roman Empire was said to be a bit gluttonous and a bit excessive. So when he'd spent through his gazillions of Roman dollars, he only had 1 million or so left, and he was so distraught at the thought of being poor, even though he had lifetimes more money than anybody else. He topped himself because the thought of having to eat with the hoi polloi was so distressing. So a bit of a sad story, but first rock star chef, and not the first one to end his life too soon, unfortunately. But when we think about Rome, you often think about those, people laying on tables or on those, like a chaise, and laying on the side and being fed grapes. It's excellent. If you've never had somebody feed you grapes while you're laying on a table, or pour honey wine down your throat, or eat strawberries off your bits and pieces, highly recommend it. And if you say to yourself, "Well, that seems a bit excessive," just think you're just being a good pagan. The Romans were pagan after all, so you're just reaching back to your roots. That's all.
Dionysian.
Speaking of which, have you read my notes? Right. So, old Dionysus. Interesting thing about Dionysus, we often think of Dionysus / Bacchus. We often think of Dionysus, as the young god, sometimes as the androgynous god, very sexy and whiny and whatnot. Whiny, like filled with wine, not like, Right, whingy, right. All of that is very true, but there was an interesting thing. So in Roman times, and in Greek actually, prior, wine was not consumed the way we consume it. First of all, it was drunk breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then later into the evening in conviviums and all things like that.
Too, right?
But it was diluted, usually 4-1 with water. It was
one wine, 4 wines, 1 water.
1 wine, 4 water, right? And that was because of folks like Plato and a few other folks who thought that being drunk was to be out of control, and to be out of control was to be like the barbarians, the people that were not Roman. And so they only drank, they were very austere. If you were a part of a cult of Dionysus, or if you were celebrating the Dionysian rituals, you drank the wine straight. And people would get very, very, very drunk. And then all sorts of frivolity and wonderful things, terrible things, would happen.
Mark Antony got a bad reputation for that.
Yeah, well, so, Dionysian cults. But the interesting about Dionysus, they loved their food, they loved their wine. It was orgiastic in every single sense of the word. Lots of food and all the other F's that go along with that. Really brilliant. But do you know why? the Dionysian cults survived as long as they did, do you know what was most the underlying tenet to Dionysian worship? You'd think that, right? It's great answer. I would think. Nope. Not food. No. Anyone?
Wasn't there like some sort of mystery cult around it?
Absolutely. Do you know what the big mystery was?
No.
Death.
So it's kind of close to illusion mysteries.
Mhm.
In that sense.
Yeah, I've got a recipe for kaikion as well, by the way. It's really good without the psychedelic drugs. Although I have a recipe for that too.
Are both in your book?
Right. So
Is it in your book?
right, it is in my book. So Dionysius, death, and that brings me to the modern day. What time is it?
4 o'clock.
Thank you. Great. Got some time. So
An hour and a half. Yeah.
great. So when we think about food, whether it's coming together in a cave 1.8 million years ago, whether it is gathering around this fire and at some point in the next couple of hours going over there to where Sean has been busily working away making pulled pork for us for hours and hours, there's a reason that we gather to eat. There are lots of reasons: community, friendship, sustenance, all of those things. But like the Dionysian cults, there is one reason that we gather and we eat. It's because we are alive. We might make offerings to the dead, but they don't need the food. They need the remembrance. That's why we make offerings to the dead. It's not because Great Uncle George says, "God, I really fancy a banana right now." It's because when we make an offering to dear old Uncle George, we're remembering dear old Uncle George.
The physical act reflects the intent.
Absolutely. In Dionysian cults, they recognized early on that life was so short and often ended tragically. So they wanted to eat it, drink it, suck it, lick it, imbibe it, smother themselves with it, whatever the it is you want to fill into that blank there. They wanted it all because what they knew was going to happen was they were going to die. Just like we will. Every one of us. It sucks out loud. I wish I could live forever, or maybe I don't. I'd like the option. But it's not going to happen. The simple fact is, I just turned 50. Fuck me, when did that happen? But the fact of the matter is, in the next 50 years, I won't be here. And somebody will be making food offerings to me if I'm lucky. As a god. No. As an ancestor. But the reason that we gather today and make the rituals that we do around food is simply because we are not dead. And because the people that we do these rituals for, each other, everyone here, we do to celebrate living. What's the first food ritual, or maybe not first, what's a very common food ritual that probably everybody has done here, most everybody has done, and if you haven't, we'll arrange to make this happen. What do you think your parents did, or the people that took care of you? What do you think they did on the anniversary of your birth?
Birthday cake.
And as you grew older, what were you expected to do with said birthday cake?
Blow out the candles.
That's a food ritual. And then,
Make a wish.
that's magic.
Yeah.
Now, has everybody here had a birthday cake and has blown out the candles?
Yes.
Because if you haven't, I'll get you a birthday cake, and we will do it. Absolutely. Right now I have a date, but I'll get you a cake. In many cases, that's the first ritual that we do. Really, if you think about it, if you are somebody that has breastfed, that first moment, right, of having your milk let down, and that first moment, and then all of the fear, does this work? How does this work? This is weird. Why is somebody's looking at my tits? It's a real thing. It's got to be the first time you're going, wait a minute. Oh, interesting.
Oh, that hurts.
Right.
And then, oh my God, that feels great.
I didn't know about that.
That's a back to Dionysus. So these are food rituals. These are food rituals. When you start whatever level of school you start, and whoever takes care of you gives you a little brown sack lunch, and you sit with a group of strangers and you trade bologna for sausages or whatever, that is a food ritual. When you got, if you have been so, if anybody here has been married or hand-fasted or some equivalent, anyone? Did you have a cake?
Yep.
2 cakes? Did you do anything with that cake?
Yes.
What did you do with it? Who said that? Say it again?
Smashed it in the face.
Right. Why?
The other one is
Tradition.
saved.
Tradition. What do you think it symbolizes? It's a little bit of fun. It's a little bit of, I hope you've always got food. There's an often thing we say, right? May you never hunger, may you never thirst. Right? It's become, a bit of a joke now, but that's really what you're doing. You're exchanging food with this person that you just said, in some variety of vows, you said, I'm going to be with you until the end of our life. And, if you're a Mormon, beyond that as well. But you do this thing. You eat this food. Please eat this food. If you don't eat this food, you'll die. Without food, you die. So please eat this sugary confection that was made and cost thousands of dollars. Eat this food.
Because if you screw up the wedding after we
I'll kill you. Right. Yeah. You are going to die.
But you won't have an empty belly.
Right. You'll die in a full stomach. Every food ritual. Who here... You don't have to answer this one out loud. I'll ask it a different way. I imagine that somebody here has lost a parent or a loved one.
Yes.
Right. Did somebody show up at your house with a tuna noodle casserole?
Nope.
Yes.
No?
Yes.
Bastards. Right. Or something. Right? Often. Maybe not always. Often. And if nobody did that for you, please, by the gods, do it for somebody else. Because if you know what it is not to receive that food, give that gift of that person never knowing what that's like. Give them food. Somebody dies, somebody shows up at your house with food. Think of every disaster you've ever seen on television, and you'll see somebody with a blanket around their shoulders and someone coming up and giving them a hot cup of coffee or some cup of... All right, so English, you lived in England for years. Do you know what the universal panacea is for everything that goes wrong in your life in England? Oh dear, let's have a nice cup of tea.
Who had a tea phobia, and she said it was the most bizarre thing to be an English woman with a tea phobia. That it ruined
She's
her
probably
life.
French.
If
She's
you
probably
watch the
French.
British mysteries, they'll be tea drunk
Right.
6 to 12 times.
At
in
least.
every episode.
My mum came home from work one day, and her washing machine and her tumble dryer had exploded, and her whole flat was flooded. And I remember Pat and Dave down the end of the street came wandering up to my mum, who came, jauntily around the corner, getting off the lift with her shopping bags from Sainsbury's, and she's walking up and she sees all this water all over the landing. I lived in council flat housing. Anyway, so she comes out, and Pat comes up and goes, "Oh, Maureen," it's my mum's name. She goes, "Oh, Maureen, I've made you a nice cup of tea." First words out of my mum's mouth, what happened? True. Well, there's been a bit of a flood. Where? Your house. All right, I'll have the tea. 2 sugars, please. I fell out of a tree. I broke my arm. Did they call the ambulance? No. They gave me a cup of hot sweet tea. Not sweet tea, like a cup of tea with extra sugar in it. It's the first thing any emergency. I hope nuclear bombs never go off, but if they do, I can absolutely guarantee you that in London somebody will go in, well, we should probably put the kettle on. No word of a lie, right?
No word of it.
Absolutely. That's a food ritual. We do it every single day. Every single time we gather. Who's got a book at their house with a recipe in it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Did you buy a cookbook? You bought a cookbook? Who's got one that's like their grandmother's tuna noodle, whatever it is? What recipe do you have?
I've got the cookbook given to my mother on the occasion of her marriage to my father. Wow. It's, to Cheryl for Tom's sake. It says
Oh my gosh. I love that. Oh my gosh.
It's wonderful.
That's
It's
great.
ancient. It's amazing.
Have you made any of the food out of it?
Yeah. Yorkshire pudding. How to roast beef properly.
Oh, excellent.
Things like important things.
Yeah. In case of emergency, how to make a cup of tea. Who else? Well, Phoenix, you've got one, right? Cheesecake. Where's that recipe come from?
My grandmother.
Right. French grandmother. That recipe is, every French recipe that Phoenix has is
More butter.
like her roasted chicken recipe, butter, add chicken. Just to be clear. But yeah, that cheesecake is phenomenal, right? It's your grandmother's. Who else? What do you?
My family, being from the south, the cornbread recipes come down from my grandmother's and so forth. It's the same recipe passed down. Cast iron skillet and all.
Cast iron cornbread is the best. There's nothing finer.
And the cast iron I have was also passed down.
All right.
So tomorrow's workshop, we're actually going to talk about magical tools, and so we'll chat again.
I even gave my son, who's now an adult, I gave him one of those pants, so passing it down to
My husband keeps pointing at me.
Yeah.
The yellow cookbook, literally, if you ask any Portuguese person, they know exactly what it is. It's all recipes that came from the islands.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh.
I have to get that.
She lives in Palo Alto. All you have to do is send her a letter and a check, and she sends you a book.
Brilliant. We'll chat. Yes.
I don't have any written down recipes, but I cooked with my mother for the longest time, and I had to write them down. I've got an apple walnut dessert salad that is from Germany. She made it every Christmas.
Amazing. So not only is that food recipe, not only is that something passed down to you, which is a magic all to itself, but it's a seasonal recipe. I mean, you could eat it any time of the year, but what you said was, we have it every Christmas. So that connects you to that family moment even more so.
Pudding is every Christmas.
Right. I have a 3-year-old Christmas pudding in my larder. Can't wait. It's almost ready. Anybody else got a food, a recipe from it? Yeah.
My grandmother passed last year,
Oh.
and I managed to beat out the cousins for the box of every little newspaper clipping and everything she'd handwritten. And I swore eventually I'll scan it, is how I got it, so that they'll have a copy. But
That's amazing.
yeah, and I mean, some of the things, they're not very old. There's a chicken salad recipe in there that it's a newspaper clipping, but it's
Like cut out of like Woman's Own or something like that. Yeah.
But it's 40-some years old.
That's brilliant.
And,
So
everybody calls it cracked chicken salad, so it's evidently decent.
there you go. So I have we'll talk about more of this tomorrow. Every one of those recipes, whether you wrote them down or not, whether they're clippings from a newspaper or a magazine, whether it's the yellow book, whether it's a piece of cast iron and the like the care instructions, how to take care of a good cast iron, which will last many lifetimes. Those are books of shadows. Those are books of shadows. And tomorrow we're going to talk more about magical tools, and we're going to talk about how all food is sacred, and we're going to talk about tools of the trade. And sometimes we think a book of shadows must be that thing that sits on an altar or in a drawer, and you write down on this ritual we did. Blah, blah, blah. Every recipe that's highlighted in a cookbook that you've got, every yellow book that's got a dog-eared page for your favorite recipe, that's a book of shadows. That's a book filled with magic. If your grandmother is passed, if whoever gave that to you is passed on, or they got it from someone that's passed on, that is an absolute remembrance of your ancestors. Every time you cook that recipe, you are in devotion, or you are praising your ancestors that first thought that making a chicken walnut salad apple was a brilliant idea.
That was a lovely discussion about one of my favorite Fs. Thank you so much, Van. He also has a book coming out soon about the topic. It's on pre-order now if you want to pick up a copy later on. And we will be reviewing that soon here on the podcast once we get a copy. Now, a quick little message from our sponsor, or the new host that I found for the podcast, before we move on to the next segment, which is the book review. All right, now on to the book review segment of the show. All right, today's book review is something that I've read recently that I actually got at the Eight Winds auction that they held every year, and it was a lot of great fun. And I got this book called Sigil Witchery by Laura Tempest Zakroff. It's available at most retailers, including Amazon, but if you can get it from your local bookstores, we do actually want to keep them in business, you know. I love the book as a whole. It's a great reference if you're learning about what sigils are or can be. If you were at her presentation at PantheaCon a few years back on the subject, you'll find most of the information very familiar. The history of sigils and visual symbols is a fascinating subject, and this book is a great gateway into it. Its bibliography gives some great resources for further research, and it's a simple collection of resources just in general. It's great for the beginner, but more advanced users might find it a bit remedial. I'm not terribly familiar with sigils, but I did go to the workshop, so I didn't learn much more than I did going to the workshop. So, in short, it's a wonderful resource for further research, and it has a few ideas if you're looking for ways to incorporate sigils into your life, but it's not something I would be referring to over and over because, over and over. It's very readable, almost conversational. It's got information, but it's not very rereadable. Read it once and you're done, basically. But it does have some lovely pictures. The references are good, though, and I would keep it just for that, honestly. So overall, this book belongs on my shelf, and I hope you can get a copy for your own. Now, on to the next segment. One of my favorites, actually. The recipe for Midsummer. I went searching for something for the podcast and found a really interesting idea for around the bonfire. It's basically a twisted bread that is baked on a stick over the fire. This Danish invention called snowbud, or twisted bread, is a really great, simple idea if you want to get people around the bonfire to roast something other than marshmallows or hot dogs. Which they can do anyways, but this is an alternative, supposedly. More healthy, apparently. Here's a simple and easy recipe for this traditional Danish bonfire bread. All right. This bread is a perfect way of creating some Nordic culture when sitting around the bonfire in the forest or the garden, according to the website where I found the recipe. Okay, the prep time for this is about an hour, and cook time is about 10 minutes. So very quick bread to make, honestly. All right, so the ingredients for this bread are 1 1/4 cups water, 1 ounce fresh yeast or similar dry yeast, 2 teaspoons sugar, 2 teaspoons salt, and 1 pound all-purpose flour. All right, so let's get going on the instructions. In a large bowl, you add the water and dissolve the fresh yeast in it. If using dry yeast, add this together with the flour in step 2. Add the all-purpose flour, salt, and sugar. Knead everything together into a smooth dough. If you're very familiar with bread doughs, you know the texture you would want, and you will add flour to this dough until you get that texture. The website actually has some really good pictures on it if you want to take a look at what exactly you're looking for. So take a look there if you need to have a visual. Let the dough rise for a minimum of 30 to 45 minutes. After this, you would then roll large and thin bread sausages and twist them around long wooden sticks that you either buy at the store or you chop up at the place where you're actually going to be roasting. If you're going to be chopping up wood, make sure you know regulations and you also know what wood is around. Make sure that it is not poison oak. Just from personal experience, please make sure your sticks are not made out of poison oak. Safety tip there. Okay, so finally, bake the bread over the bonfire. You get the best twisted bread by baking them over hot embers. I'm planning on making this for our next ritual, maybe adding applesauce and cinnamon to the dough to make it more seasonally interesting. We'll see how it turns out. Next up, we have our calendar events coming up in the next 3 months. And just for reference, this was actually a list of events that I had in the wings because the ADF website is being reformatted in a lot of different ways, so a lot of things are moving around. And the page where they have a list of events that ADF is going to be at or is what's the word sponsoring is a little out of date. So I went through my list that I had from 2017 and updated the websites and things like that. And it ends up that there's a lot of festivals that are coming up in the next coming months. And the first of which is going to be the Summerland Gathering. It's going to be the August 15th through the 18th. And it's going to be at Camp Clifton in Yellow Springs, Ohio. And their website is going to be listed, as said before, is going to be listed in the show notes because this is a long one and it's got a lot of weird configurations of numbers in it. So I'm just going to leave you to find the link in the show notes because I'm not reading this out. All right, but they do have a website that's available and it is very much up to date on the information you need for this particular festival, how you get registered, what's going on, who's going to be there, what's going to be going on, things like that. So 15th through the 18th of August, coming up, Summerland Gathering for 2019. All right, and so the next event that's happening is the Beyond the Gates Festival. And this is going to be happening August 22nd through the 25th. And it's going to be at Trout Lake Abbey in Trout Lake, Washington. And their website, very simple, is beyondthegates.weebly.com. Okay, and if you want more information, go to their website. They've got registration lists and things of who's going to be there, what's going to be going on. Any more information that you need is going to be on the website. Okay, and the next event is one a little bit local to me, up in Sacramento. It's going to be the Sacramento Pagan Pride Festival. And it is a 2-day festival. It is on Saturday and Sunday, September 14th and 15th. And it's going to be going on from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Sunday. And it's going to be 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. on Saturday. And it's going to be, once again, at their usual spot. It's going to be in Fair Oaks, California. And the address is on their website as well. It's over on 8990 Kruitof Way at the Veterans Affairs Community Center down there. And their website is sacpaganpride.com if you want more information about how to get registered or even, well, you don't actually have to register for this one. Just when to show up and who's going to be there, what's going to be going on, and how to get there. All right, so, and the next event that's coming up is going to be the Columbia Willamette Pagan Pride Day. And this is going to be on Sunday, September 15th at 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. A really small festival that's happening, Pagan Pride Festival. It's going to be happening in Portland, Oregon. And their website, once again, is a string list of numbers. And it is also under construction. But they are on Facebook. You look up Columbia Willamette Pagan Pride, and it'll be in the show notes as well, just to get the spelling right. Pagan Pride Day, and you'll find them on Facebook with all the information of how to get there, where it's going to be at in Portland, Oregon. The address that are actually going to be at is 7805 Southeast Oaks Park Way in Portland, Oregon. So, hope you have a great time if you go, and if you're in the area. Okay, so, and the last festival that we have for the coming months is going to be the Rocky Mountain Retreat, which is an ADF run festival over in near Colorado Springs. And it's going to be happening October 18th through the 20th. And it's going to be at the La Foret Conference Center near Colorado Springs. And on their website, they actually do have a link to the conference center telling you where that's at, how to get in there. And there's a lot of information on the website. So I'm just going to point you towards that website for you to get all of that information, because there's a lot of information you're going to need for that. And the website you're going to be looking for is their website, which is chokecherryadf.org. And you're going to be looking under the Rocky Mountain Retreat headline, which is right up at the top. Just click on that, and all the information about the festival and links to how to get there, what's going to be going on, and who's going to be there are going to be right there for you. All right, and that's the end of the calendar for August, September, and October. Next 3 months here. Okay, so, all right. Wrapping up, I would first like to thank you all for your submissions and all the people that let me record their stuff, and the books that I read and all that good stuff. I would especially like to thank, again, Bonnie Landry, who you heard in the intro with Fire Burn Bright. I would also like to thank, again, Gwion Raven for his sitting down with us at 8 Winds and discussing one of his favorite Fs. I just love that phrase. I have to use that multiple times during the podcast, I swear. Thanks, Gwen, for the phrase, because that's just awesome. All right, so we're getting ready to put the next podcast together at Kindling the Hearthfire. And if you have any ideas, celebrations, poems, songs, invocations, or anything else that you would like to hear included in the podcast, please send them to kindlingthehearthfire@gmail.com. Or if you're listening to this on my new host, which is Anchor, they also have an option where you can actually send me audio messages that can be included in the podcast as well. So that's another option for you guys who don't want to send me an email. Make it really easy for you people. All right. Love to hear from everyone. I also would love to see pictures of your celebrations. Either post them to the Facebook group or on Instagram with the hashtag KTH. You can find our podcast on Stitcher, iTunes, and on Patreon. Be well, and may you continue to pray with a good fire.